Australians weren't oblivious to Trump's exceptionalism, but they preferred to regard him as an aspirational symbol. Parquet Arthur Streeton, Australia could afford artists after all, and appreciate them too, providing they were in flannel at any rate. And the diffusion of Trump's image gave urgency to the task of describing him and cricket more generally. Finding adequate terms became challenging as not before. Read contemporary accounts of Trumper, you sometimes sense writers the limits of their expression. Fry wrote, "Trumper is perhaps the most difficult batsman in the world to reduce to words." Albert Knight, "Such a one is not to be written about with a recipe book in hand or a bundle of statistics at one's elbow." Frank Iredale, "I cannot speak of him as a cricketer because I realise that nothing I could say would do him justice." Sir Home Gordon, "Virgil and Dante invoked the muse to help their pens, and some such assistance is needed to do justice to the magnificent batting of Victor Trumper." In a 1902 match report, the Sydney Morning Herald reporter copped out altogether. He wrote, "His batting was brilliant in the extreme, and it is impossible to say more." In a 1912 column, Arawar of the Daily Telegraph described being told off at the SCG for merely using the word fine while describing Trumper's batting against South Africa. I'll quote this passage, I love it. One of those uniquely Trumperian efforts had dazed me. It was all wriggle and wrist, and the ball shot away as if it had been belched forth by a 9.2. I just murmured in a kind of spellbound reverie, "What a fine batsman Trumper is." "Fine?" shrieked an aged historian near me. "Where did you ever see the like?" I hadn't. I said so, and I made up my mind that I would consult Crabbe for the right word next time. Crabbe was actually short for Crabbe's English synonyms explained in alphabetical order, a kind of a popular thesaurus at the time. In The Game's the Thing, which probably contains the finest technical analysis of Trumper anywhere, Monty Noble explains his subject's uniqueness by reference to the inadequacy of words. He wrote, "In many ways, he reminded me of a great orator. You follow the discourse, even anticipate the words he is going to use. It all seems so natural and so easy. Yet, if you try to do it yourself, you fail miserably." In his canonical text, The History of Cricket, H.S. Altham argued that those wishing to understand Trumper should simply, quote, "study the glorious series of photographs of Trumper in action contained in Beatrice Fry's Great Batsman, because try to reduce to words the art of this consummate batsman is almost an impertinence." But when they did try to sum Trumper up, they reached often for a word that we would, I think, feel awkward using in the context of cricket today, and that was genius. The earliest usage was applied to him even before he played for Australia by not out in the Referee in 1899. Trumper does not belong to the ordinary class of batsmen. He is above them, for he is a genius. Perhaps the lushest usage was by a former opponent, Albert Knight, in The Complete Cricketer, 1906. "With luxuriant masterfulness, yet with the unlaboured, easy naturalness of a falling tear, or rather of showers from the sunny lips of summer, he diverted the ball in every conceivable direction which his genius willed." But there are many others. I'll list a few of them here. I won't go through all of them. In brief, he was a genius, said Longleg of The Sporting Life, and that basically sums up what everyone is saying in fundamentally in slightly different ways. It's not a word, I must say, that you'd use nowadays in the context of modern Australian opening batsmen. Genius. And it seems an extravagant use of the word for what we take to be more conservative, less hyperbolic times 100 years ago. But in fact, the subject of genius was of intense interest during Trumper's lifetime, Francis Galton having first popularised the idea in his book Hereditary Genius in 1869. The Italian Cesare Lombroso had explored the subject of artistic genius in his book Men of Genius in 1889. The American James Cattell had searched for measures of genius in his statistical study of eminent men in 1903. The Briton Havelock Ellis had outlined his study of British genius in 1904, what he thought were genius's preconditions. He concluded that geniuses tended to come from large families with elderly parents, to be feeble in youth but live long lives, to be well educated and well travelled, but to contract late or sexless marriages. So why did cricket savants apply the term to trumper, to which none of the foregoing applied? Well, why not? Trumper and the other great players of this belle epoque, I suspect, made them feel entitled to parity with the other fields in which genius was identified: art, literature, music, science. If you go through studies published between 1900 and 1915 in which the subject was assessed as a genius, the tag is applied sparingly. There are books about the genius of Shakespeare, Dickens, Hugo, Pasteur, Milton, Louis Braille, William Hogarth, Henry Fielding, and one Australian, the author of For the Term of His Natural Life, whose biographer A.W. Brazier entitled his 1900 book, Marcus Clarke, His Work and Genius. The confident, almost brazen proclamation of Trumper's genius, then, was a statement of cricket's growing pride, of confidence of its role in national and imperial culture. But nor is this, I think, merely a fancy of its time. We still tend to think of genius in terms of sudden inspiration, of spontaneous waves, explosive impulses. We have in this image, then, perhaps cricket's original stroke of genius. As Cardus wrote, "Whoever would not be spendthrift of language about Trumper, let him not write on him at all." What we're seeing in this time, in Australia especially, at the turn of the century, is a people falling in love with cricket all over again. First of all, there had been joy in winning. Now they were awakening to cricket's additional pleasures, intimate insights, revelatory beauties, the spirit behind the Trumperian leap. Read enough of it and you can't help but being struck at how ebullient, joyous and ambitious is the writing Trumper stimulated, as though writers were trying to match his strokes with their own, to conceive of a grammar of style, a rubric of aesthetics. Alan Atkinson notes in his third volume of The Europeans in Australia that following sport was an underpinning of our newborn nation's education. Atkinson wrote, "Is it surprising that some boys kept to their reading lessons so they could read about sport, or to their mathematics so they could do the necessary calculation?" Imagine the schoolboy poring over this intricate commingling of method and measure in the Sydney Morning Herald, describing Trumper's highest test score. To the mathematician, it may be of interest to know that Trumper scored 208 not out, that he batted for nearly 4 hours, that 25 boundaries punctuated figures, and not one chance marred the symmetry of the exhibition. But the cricket enthusiast likes to know that it was graceful and a brilliant exposition of the national game. Trumper took length balls off the off-peg and hooked them to the leg boundary. He forgot that the best wicketkeeper in the world was crouching behind him and drove fasts and slows indiscriminately. Off theory that the cautious tyro leaves alone, Trumper tackled vigorously and cut and drove hot-footed to the railing. To quote Atkinson again, "Riding like this brought the game home. You could imagine yourself there. You shared the excitement, but also the cleverness of the skilled observer." Consider too this Fry appreciation, not by CB himself, but by his formidable wife, Beatrice. You can tell she's quite formidable just by looking at that photo. She wrote this in a February 1904 edition of an English magazine called The VO. It's quite a long passage, but I really like it. "There is something peculiarly satisfactory in his having such a suitable name. Victor Trumper, with a real healthy, fresh pink skin, a long, muscular neck, and small, keen, bright eyes. Nothing sad about those eyes, not for one moment. A pair of very fine arms, splendid forearms, wrists and hands. The whole together makes up a very perfect telephonic communication between his eye and bat. Rather sturdy legs, which never are between the wickets or on the edge of a very wide boundary, but try all day. When Trumper chasing the ball comes towards you, the air seems to divide. He wakes a buzz of power, something like you associate with a very first-rate motor car. When he bats, if you are fond of cricket in the right sort of way, to you then will trumpet's batting be like reading Robert Louis Stevenson's description of some great granite rocks. There they stand for all the world like their neighbours ashore, only the salt water sobbing between them instead of the quiet earth, the clots of sea pink blooming on their sides instead of heather, and the great sea conger to wreath about the base of them instead of the poisonous viper of the land. It is good and pleasant to watch cricket with the same mind's eye that glories in a beautifully written description. His timing has the exactness, rhythm and fit of the ocean-going ship's piston rod, true. Quite naturally, his bat hits the ball. Owing to the fibre of the hit, a beautiful stroke is the outcome, and this to almost every ball which is bowled. He shifts his feet, steps across, over and back with infinite variety and ease. He can play any bowling on any wicket, not from any particular luck, but just sheer natural ability. He is a poet of cricket. He has a poet's extra sense, touch and feeling. Trumper can play with his bat a cricket ball as Paganini played his violin. To him it is alive. He plays his strokes by nature in the easiest possible way, to do it well and get all there is to be got out of a particular stroke, a note. Trumper is an artist. Someday someone will paint his portrait. It will be hung in the National Portrait Gallery. He will be dressed in white, with his splendid neck bared to the wind, standing on short green grass against a blue sky. He will be waiting for the ball, an orchestra to strike up. Not even a bowler need go away regretfully from this healthy, strong picture, so easily imagined, a white flannelled knight. This traverses an extraordinary expanse of aesthetic territory, physical, literary, poetic, artistic, musical, mechanical even, in the invocation of the telephone, the motor car and the steamer's propeller. But it might interest you to know that it was republished, as a lot of writing from English journals was, not only by Sydney's The World News, but the Singleton Argus, the Richmond River Express and Tweed Advertiser, and the Albury Banner and Wodonga Express. And there is something enchanting about imagining a farmer at his rocking chair reading such an appraisal by lamplight, or a farmer's son coming across it when his father had finished. The Australian sporting reader might never hear Paganini or never visit the National Portrait Gallery, but here he was being told one of his countrymen, a sportsman, had scaled equal heights of beauty. The pride was enhanced by the sense of a sportsman as a creative export, winning cultural fame abroad. There exists in the collection of the Melbourne Cricket Club, for example, this delightful short letter from the English essayist and poet E.V. Lucas to the Triad, the pioneering Sydney Literary Journal, responding to an inquiry about his appreciation of things Antipodean. Lucas wrote, "My Sir, the Australian who in his brief time gave me most pleasure and excitement was Victor Trumper. In literature I should name Henry Lawson, who I knew in London. I have met none of your blacks. Yours sincerely, E.V. Lucas." In winning the acclamation of the English literary cognoscenti then, Richard Flanagan was following in the footsteps not just of our first great writer, but our first master batsman. I have not the time here to go into Trumper's individual feats or those of his teams, neither shall I explore how his legend was enriched by his lovable personality and premature death, nor how his various biographers have tended it. What I want to do, though, is open your minds to how Trumper opened their minds, the minds of his contemporary admirers. He made them see batting, sport, Australia, and even genius in a new light, and for that they remained ever grateful. I've mentioned Bradman only fleetingly here. This is a forum that Trumper should have to himself. But I might recite one closing anecdote of this place from November 1928, when the English playwright Ben Travis, travelling with the Marylebone Cricket Club, saw something he never forgot and recalled into his 90s when he wrote it in a memoir. Travis was watching the young Bradman for the first time, representing New South Wales, and making 87 and 132 not out. Recalled Travers, "I witnessed one striking incident during that innings of his. When Bradman made one particularly brilliant cover drive, an enthusiast sitting near me in their member stand was so carried away that he rose to his feet and shouted, 'Trumper!' He was pulled violently back into his seat and for the moment appeared in danger of being lynched. However exultant his fellow members were about the Bowral boy, they remained devout in their worship of their old heroes. This was near blasphemy." Once opened, though, the windows of the mind can never be completely closed, and Bradman was to throw them wide open again. But let us honour tonight the man and the cricketer who opened those windows for the first time. Thank you.